Welcome to the Keto Summit show, where it's all about helping you lose weight, regain energy, and live a healthier lifestyle using a keto diet. Here's your host, Louise.
Hi, welcome everyone. And today I am joined by Carolyn Ketchum, who is a writer, photographer, and the mastermind behind All Day I Dream About Food. It's one of the most popular low-carb sites on the world, on the web, and probably in the world too.
I wish, I hope.
Oh, I'm pretty sure it is. Carolyn's mission is to prove to the world that special diets don't have to be boring or restrictive. And through her diagnosis initially of diabetes, she discovered that with a little bit of ingenuity and some perseverance, many of the traditional high-carb desserts and recipes can be made into low-carb treats without any sacrifice to the flavor. So Carolyn, welcome to the Keto Summit show. I'm super excited to have you on here because I've been following your blog personally for many, many years now. So it's lovely to finally be able to chat with you.
Thank you, Louise. You and I have been like online friends for a really long time. So yeah, it's really nice to see you face to face. So.
Well, thank you for being here. And I'm going to jump straight into the questions because today we're going to talk about easy keto desserts that anybody can make. And we're going to show people just how easy it is to actually make desserts on a ketogenic diet.
Great. My favorite subject.
So if somebody is new to a low-carb keto diet and they want to get into baking, what should they be stocking in their pantry to make sure they have all the right ingredients before they get started?
Well, okay, that's, some of that depends on preferences. I really like almond flour and coconut flour. I use them both. I use it can take a lot of people time to find out which sweetener they really, really like. Some people find one has an aftertaste or, for another person that causes some stomach upset. So everybody has different things and different tastes, but you need to work at finding a sweetener you like because obviously dessert needs to be sweetened. I like Swerve sweetener. It's an erythritol-based sweetener. And then you have to have things like eggs. If you're dairy-free, have things like full-fat coconut milk. I keep both. I keep cream and full-fat coconut milk, cream cheese, and there's actually some good dairy-free cream cheese these days. And let me think. Those would be sort of the basics. Cocoa powder and unsweetened chocolate would allow you to make a lot of chocolate-flavored things, and extracts, which to me are sort of the fun part of keto baking because I can't eat bananas, but I can put banana extract in something and it can taste like bananas, or, vanilla extract, obviously, but there's so many fun ones out there now, like caramel and peppermint and almond, and you can just have a lot of fun with those. So and they're cheap, or relatively inexpensive, I should say. And so I really recommend having those ones. So those would probably be my basics for a baking pantry.
Very nice. And those are definitely some of my essentials in my pantry too, especially like the coconut and almond flour. And do you want to expand a little bit about, different types of almond flour? I know there's like,
Sure.
finely ground meals.
Sure. Yes. Almond flour. When I say almond flour, me personally, I'm always referring to the finely ground blanched almond flour. And by blanched, it means it's had the skins removed. And so it acts more like true flour. There are what they call natural almond flours or almond meal, and it often has the skin still on. And so you see little brown flecks in it, and it's often not as finely ground. And then there's some things that call themselves almond flour, but they're more like, I would say, almond meal. They're just a little coarser, and so they don't work as well in cakes and sort of fine baked things. So you really want to look. There's some great brands out there. There's Honeyville. If you have a Costco, they have a Kirkland brand, which I actually think is actually made by Honeyville, but packaged by them. I love Bob's Red Mill. I almost always use Bob's Red Mill. Anthony's is a good one. So there's several choices out there that do a really truly finely ground almond flour.
And do you find they're fairly similar in, what you get, or?
Yeah, I would say so, yes, although you have to be ready to adjust sometimes because something might be, a little more finely ground, or it might be more finely harder packed in the package. So you end up, if you have a scale, this is really important for baking, for keto baking. If you have a scale at home, weigh things if the person gives you the weight of the almond flour, because that can make a real difference, because different brands can vary a little.
Yeah. What about if somebody doesn't have access, maybe they're in Europe or another part of the world where it's really hard to find almond flour? They could make their own, like you mentioned, it's kind of got the skin on it, you just grind it up perhaps in your food processor.
Yes.
How would that compare then?
It probably wouldn't be as fine. I mean, it's really hard to get it as fine as a commercially ground almond flour. And if you were going to do that, I would have a couple suggestions. Get sliced almonds or slivered almonds that are blanched already, so they wouldn't have the, if you can get blanched almonds or the slivered ones are always, they don't have any skin on them. And then instead of a food processor, if you have a coffee grinder, it actually works a little better. It gets it more fine, but you have to do it a little bit at a time. That's the only problem. Like you can't do, 2 cups of almonds. You're going to be doing like half a cup at a time, but and then you can even do something if you really want to take it to the next level, is to put it through a sieve. So you only get the finest ground, bits, and then you shake it until you get I'm doing this and you can't see me. You shake it until you get the finest bits into a bowl, and then you put the coarser bits back in. So that can be really time consuming, but you could do it. Yeah, you sure could.
Wow. Yes.
I've done it with sunflower seeds. So made my own sunflower flour. So that's how I know you could do it.
Wow.
So
that's intensive.
I know, you have to be really dedicated.
Yeah. What about baking with something like almond butter then? Would that be fairly similar, do you think, to almond flour? Or, it's just almond flour plus a little bit of oil? Or?
Well, I wouldn't think so. I mean, because first of all, even almond butter brands vary so much.
Yeah.
So
it's really hard to replace almond flour.
Yeah, it's really hard to replace almond flour in something that calls for almond flour, and you'd throw off. It'd be really hard to judge how much liquid you should add instead, to counteract the oils and things in there. So I probably wouldn't advise that. No, because there are definitely some recipes that are flourless, or they call themselves flourless, and they're made with like nut butters, which are great. But, look for those kinds of recipes if that's what you're interested in.
Yeah, but don't do the substitution. Don't try to be clever about
that.
That
I can't see that working very well. Unless you could, you might come out with something delicious, but you also might come out with something that's so wet that you couldn't actually eat it. So
great. Well, why don't we switch into coconut flour, which was your second favorite flour that you mentioned earlier? Do you want to tell us? Think about that.
I don't even know if it's my second favorite. It's like the two are. Yeah, no, I know. The two are very, very different. And so you absolutely, one thing that I have to say off the top of the, top here is, do not try to replace almond flour with coconut flour. You basically have to rewrite the whole recipe. Coconut flour is really, really fine, and it's really, really absorbent. So it needs a lot of eggs to bake with it. You need a lot less of it. Like it's basically like a 3-to-1 ratio. So like 1/3 cup coconut flour equals a cup of almond flour. But then you have to change the rest of the recipe too by adding more eggs, a little more oil, and a little more, because it's also less oily, and a little more liquid. So the whole recipe kind of has to be taken apart. And when people ask me to sub, I usually say, look, I have so many recipes. You can probably find a coconut flour based one on my blog or someone else's blog but you can take the flavor profile that I've done and, substitute it that way, because they're so different. Sometimes if you try to just switch it up, it can be disastrous. But coconut flour is amazing. And it's a divisive one. Some people are like, I don't like the taste of coconut, and I can taste it no matter what in things. But I find that when, like, say something chocolate, like I have these really, really good chocolate cake donuts on my blog that are made with coconut flour, and I'd swear you can't taste the coconut, but some people dislike it so much that they don't even want to try. So
what would you say is the main difference between the flavors of almond versus coconut flour then? Is it just the coconutty flavor, or is it because you have to mix so much more eggs in with the coconut flour that it changes the flavor profile and what you can make with the flours?
I think you can get them to both be neutral if you're working with other strong flavors. But it does take, coconut can come through if you're not working with stronger flavors. Whereas I feel like almond flour doesn't it's not as forward in the taste profile. So it's not something that kind of bonks you over the head and says, hey, I'm made with almond flour. Whereas coconut flour can sometimes be like, hey, I'm coconut and I'm here. And no matter what you do, I'm going to be here. So I love coconut. So for me, it's great. But there are times I think that, if people don't like it, it can be hard to overcome.
And then do you have a lot of recipes where you mix both of them together then?
I do. I have a lot of cakes where I do that because I find that because almond flour has a lot of like oils in it, but coconut flour doesn't, together they can make like a really good cake that has the right kind of crumb and is really fine. So I often do sort of 2 cups in a cake, I often do something like 2 cups of almond flour and 1/3 cup of coconut flour. I find that works really well.
Very nice. So one of the questions I get asked a lot is, I have this great, dessert recipe. I don't know, some chocolate cake recipe that's passed down from my grandmother. I want to make it into a keto one. How do I substitute this regular flour and sugar into keto ones?
I know, that's a really tough one. First of all, it's always going to depend on the recipe. It depends on what you're going for. So I can't tell somebody, okay, do this much almond flour and these many eggs and this much oil. Here's why. A cake is very different from a cookie. So a cookie needs to be dense and hard or harder, and a cake needs to be like light and fluffy. So it's not this sort of direct substitution. But one thing, especially for cakes, that really, really helps is, and I always point this out to people, so gluten is a protein. And one thing that really helps a cake or a baked good, muffins or cakes or cupcakes, rise and hold their shape is added protein. So I put whey protein, but you can put egg white protein in because it's dry and gluten's a dry protein. You're basically like making up for the lack of gluten. So that can help in somebody's cake, grandmother's cake recipe. And it's usually you only need like a 1/4 cup of the protein powder, whatever one you're using.
Very nice. But in general, it sounds like we should really stick with great recipes like the ones on your website and in your cookbooks, rather than try to, figure out how to substitute everything.
Well, I wouldn't say that exactly. I think you can once you know what you're working with, and that can take years, unfortunately. So I can look at a recipe, I read a lot of other blogs, and I read a lot of non-low carb blogs because I get a lot of inspiration from them. And I can look at a cake and go, okay. And I literally start writing like what I'm going to do to replace everything. Sometimes it works. Sometimes it doesn't. Most of the time it works these days because I have an eye for it. But, if you get used to it, but I would say always start with someone else's well-loved recipe. Like if it gets great reviews and people say, oh, this tastes just like, whatever cake, then start there. And then once you're comfortable with those ingredients, you can start going, oh, well, maybe I can change, grandma's cake into the one that I love. So, or the one that I can eat, the keto one that I can eat. So,
well, you've been developing recipes in the low carb keto space for a very long time now.
I have.
Do you want to give us some insight into how you got into this world?
Sure, I'd love to. So I had gestational diabetes with my 3rd child, and I was this, slender, fit person, and everybody was surprised. And so I did what my endocrinologist said and ate, a certain number of carbs but it was not great advice, I think now. I tried to follow the standard American diet and yet, stay off insulin while I was pregnant. And that was tough. It was really, really tough. I basically had to walk after every meal, even when I was heavily pregnant in the middle of the summer in Boston. So you can imagine how little I wanted to do it. And to be able to keep my blood sugar under control, I had to do a lot of walking, and, a 1/4 cup of oatmeal would shoot up my blood sugars. And I'd think, how this doesn't work. So after she was born, it seemed to go away for a little while. And then it snuck up on me again. My endocrinologist had said, test every so often. And so I did. And I started to see the numbers creep up, especially around the holidays when, even though I was trying to be lower sugar, I wasn't avoiding grains or anything. And I was like, gosh, this is hard. And I started doing my own research on, how to be low carb. And I was really devastated and thought I'd never be able to eat baked goods again and bake. Some of it's not even about the eating, it's about the cooking, because I absolutely love to bake. And so, but then I just started to play with things like almond flour and coconut flour. And let me tell you, at the beginning, I had some real failures. I had some coconut flour brownies that were so awful, I can't even tell you. So those got thrown away. But eventually it just I started to realize, okay, if I'm going to work with coconut flour, I need to do this. Or if I'm going to work with almond flour, I need to do this. And you get there by feel some of the time. So that's really what happened. I just kind of kept going, and I've been doing it for 8 years now.
Oh my God. Wow. That's amazing. No wonder you can take a look at a recipe and be like, okay, yeah, we can switch this.
Yeah. And the reality is it's now my job. And so I do it every day. So, I mean, it's not like a hobby baker anymore, so that's why a lot of people write to me and say, how would you adjust this? And, sometimes they'll just say, I have this great cake and I want to make it with almond flour. And I'm like, unless you send me the recipe, I cannot help you. And then I can take a look at the recipe and step by step suggest what they might do. I can't say it always works, but usually I think it does. So,
yeah. Well, you have an amazing new cookbook out, and it's got tons of delicious keto dessert recipes.
Yes.
So for someone who's very new to baking with keto, could you suggest a couple recipes that they should get started with that would make it, ease them into the process of learning about this?
Absolutely. So my new book is called, and I'll hold it up, Easy Keto Desserts. I have it here. I
have it here on my iPad.
And so a lot of them are actually no-bake recipes. So if you're just looking for a sweet treat, a lot of them are no-bake, which is kind of nice, but I do have some baked ones in here as well. So I'm going to show you one because you asked for dairy-free ones, and these are so easy, these keto peppermint patties. These are so easy. Yes. I actually made them on Facebook Live one day. They're that easy. I showed people exactly how to make them. And then let's see for a baked good, I just found, where are you? They're called one bowl brownies, if I can find them again. This actually does take a little bit of almond flour. And so this is actually baked, which is nice if you want to try baking. And it's made with avocado oil, so that too is dairy-free. But if you wanted to make it with butter, you totally could. I would probably reduce the butter to a 1/2 cup instead of a 3/4 cup because it tends to be greasier that way. I'm trying to think of what else is. I have so about 50% of the book is dairy-free, but I do like my dairy. So, these ones are kind of fun too. These dairy-free fruit tarts. And the filling is just coconut cream, sweetened coconut cream. So that one's really nice as well. So I have tons in here, but, it depends on what your tastes are. And do you want to bake, and actually try putting it in the oven and see what happens? Because there's actually a couple cake recipes in here too for that. Or do you want just something super easy that you can whip up, and there's even a couple that you can eat right away after you whip them up. A lot of them need to sit for a little while in the fridge to set, but there's even a couple that I call instant, that you can eat right away after you bake them. So,
yeah, I really like the mug cakes. I saw you had a pumpkin spice one in there.
Yes, and that actually has so little flour. It has like a couple tablespoons of coconut flour, I think, in it, that it's almost like the filling from from pumpkin pie. So it's a little more like custard than actually like a cake. So
yeah, so easy and so delicious.
Thank you. Have you tried anything from it?
I haven't yet. So the book actually got shipped to my parents' house, unfortunately. So.
Oh, okay. Yeah. Well, there's a lot.
I actually want to try the deep dish chocolate chip cookies.
Oh, those are very good. And you can make them dairy-free too. Just sub in coconut oil or avocado oil and you're perfect. So
yeah, that one definitely caught my eye.
Yeah.
Well, thank you so much. I hope everyone really enjoyed learning about this. Keto baking is actually remarkably easy once you get a hang of it. It's just really getting started. It can be really daunting to use these new flours, especially when you're unused to it. And picking a sweetener, as you mentioned earlier, that is key, figuring out which one you like and which one, works for your body. And everyone's slightly different. Some people prefer this taste, some people prefer this other taste. Right,
exactly. And I do talk about sweeteners in the book and actually in my other cookbooks as well, because they can bake differently. So if you're looking for a specific outcome, some might not be the right ones for you.
Yeah, I really like actually the beginning of your book where you even show exactly which brands you like to use and make suggestions on what the differences are.
And actually in this book, I talk about, for each one, I talk about what other sweeteners you could sub if you don't like the same ones I like. So, because I know it's hard. We don't all have the same taste. So yeah.
No, super useful. Well, thank you again. And we will drop all the links of where you can find Carolyn and all her delicious recipes, including this new cookbook.
Yes, thank you so much.
Thank you. Hey, it's Louise from the Keto Summit Show, where we share practical tips and actionable advice to help you look good and feel good lifelong. So if you've enjoyed watching this video, then please click the subscribe button on YouTube and share our YouTube link with your friends and family. Thanks, and see you on the next episode.